Today we're discussing some significant NHL trade rumors around the Montreal Canadiens. Today we saw a press conference involving Ken Hughes discussing a lot about the team's future plans, as well as the recent trade he made involving Tyler Toffoli. Who might he trade? Which players might stay? We'll discuss the future of the Habs, plus we also have a signing, a waiver wire claim, and some injury updates. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have some significant Montreal Canadiens trade rumors to talk about here shortly. But first up, we do have a few other tidbits of news to discuss. We had another waiver claim here today. The Toronto Maple Leafs have claimed forward Adam Brooks, who was on waivers from the Vegas Golden Knights. So Adam Brooks started the year in Toronto, was lost on waivers to the Montreal Canadiens, and then at one point Montreal placed him on waivers where he ended up being claimed and going to Vegas. And now he works his way back to the Maple Leafs. I know Sheldon Keefe had made comments when he was placed on waivers originally, saying there was a lot that they liked about Brooks and they were hoping they wouldn't lose him. So now they're able to get him back. While he was gone, he only played 4 games for the Habs and he played 7 games for the Golden Knights, and he scored 2 goals along the way. So even though he's been gone, it feels like a really long time. He's only played 11 NHL hockey games, and I believe he's played a handful of games at the AHL level for the Golden Knights as well. So Adam Brooks officially returns to the Leafs lineup. Of course, he will need to go through and clear waivers to be assigned to their minor league affiliate, which is what they were trying to do when they lost him in the first place. So he will remain on the NHL roster, at least for the time being, to make room and accommodate things cap-wise. They had to demote Timothy Liljegren, so he goes down to the Toronto Marlies to create the necessary space for the Brooks addition to the roster. So you have to think that they probably won't want to do that for too long a period of time. So whether we see a Nick Ritchie trade here in the short term, or another deal freeing up another roster spot or cap space or what have you to kind of make the necessary space, you have to think Kyle Dubas and the Leafs are probably working on some potential other moves here that might be able to be executed in the short term. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Now, we also saw another signing today. The Nashville Predators have extended defenseman Mark Borowiecki for one more season at $900,000. Of course, Borowiecki ended up playing the last couple years for the Preds. Currently, he's earning $2 million. He's played 40 games this year and put up 2 assists. He's certainly not known for his offensive output. Borowiecki's a stay-at-home, old school style, tough defenseman who's not afraid to drop the gloves. That's what he's known for, and he will continue to provide that in Nashville for another year. To get him to sign for one more season at less than half of what he's making right now, to me, I think is pretty decent. Obviously, he wanted to stay in Nashville. We'll take the extra year of security instead of entering free agency here yet again. I know he was a long-time defenseman for the Sens, and ever since landing in Nashville, seems to be quite content and happy to stay there. So good signing for Nashville for that kind of value. I think you really can't go wrong. Now, we also had a fine issued today by NHL Player Safety. Sabres young forward Dylan Cozens was fined the maximum allowed by the CBA for cross-checking, which is not a huge amount, $2,235. Of course, it was kind of a really unnecessary, a little bit of a bonehead play, but things happen in the heat of the moment. The players regret all the time. In the game last night against the New York Islanders, heading towards the bench, he really had a really hard cross-check, which appeared to be for no good reason on Brock Nelson of the Islanders. Of course, I was watching a different game at the time, so I didn't see it live, but I did catch the replay, and obviously, like I said, it seemed really avoidable, unnecessary. There was no good reason to do it, in my opinion, but obviously Cozens will literally pay the price for those actions. Now, of course, we know Brad Marchand currently is serving a suspension for an incident that happened against the Pittsburgh Penguins, where he essentially kind of snapped and obviously had a run-in with goalie Tristan Jarry. He was suspended for 6 games. He officially had his hearing today to officially appeal that suspension. So, of course, I don't know exactly the time frame on when we'll get a result, if it's going to be held up, reduced, or what have you. But obviously at this point, I'm not sure exactly how many games Marchand's missed. I believe it's at like 2 or 3 now. So by the time they render a decision, he might not have a whole lot of time left anyways. But what happens in those cases, let's say that they take their time making a decision and that he's already got the time served before that is rendered. What happens is he obviously can't go back in time and play games that were already done with, but he would get money back for time that he was not paid for, because obviously when they're suspended, they don't receive their pay. They forfeit that money. So instead of forfeiting it, he would get it back instead. But so there's a financial gain, but obviously they're hoping for I'm sure a speedy decision here, but I would suspect that it's probably going to be at least tomorrow would be my guess. But time will tell here when we get an update on Brad Marchand. But that appeal is officially taking place, and now we wait for results. Now, on the injury front, we're going to kind of segue here into the Montreal Canadiens. We have a lot to talk about when it comes to the Habs. We learned a lot today during the immediate availability of General Manager Kent Hughes, including an update on the injured Carey Price, who was yet to make an appearance yet this season. Now, Carey Price himself had immediate availability not too long ago. I can't remember the exact date, but it's within the last 2 weeks, and he indicated at that point that he was still hopeful and optimistic to be able to play this year, something he wants to be able to do. But the next couple of weeks were going to be critical in rehab and getting through that to be able to make that return possible. Now, at this point, Price has not really been able to carry on fully with the full recovery process. It was revealed that he's not going to skate at all this week. He's back in the gym, which obviously leads us to believe that there has been a form of a setback. Hughes did say today that, to the best of his knowledge, there was still a chance he could play this year. But certainly, like I said, regardless of what's going on with the Montreal Canadiens, I think it would be beneficial for Price to be able to play for a variety of reasons, including just to know that he can play on the injured knee, that everything seems to be recovered enough that he can regain his form. Clearly, we don't know what the Habs think or feel in regards to his future with the club. He does have full control with a no-move clause. There's been a lot of talk that they would consider trying to move him, but there's no real urgency on that front right now while he's injured. And of course, there's really not something that's going to happen ahead of the deadline. I think that's a guarantee. So clearly, if a Price trade did happen, it would certainly be in the offseason. But of course, there's a lot of things that need to happen in order to really even facilitate that at this point. If he doesn't end up playing this year, I would think that the odds of getting him traded, if that's something they want to do, would likely be a lot more difficult given the uncertainty. If you look back at the Seattle expansion draft last offseason, he was exposed. Yes, he made aware that he had some things he had to work on, and at this point, Seattle might be content that they didn't take him considering he hasn't played this season. But at the same time, they had an option to take him for nothing. They could have even had him on IR all year for the hope that he'll be able to return in the future, and they didn't take advantage of that. It was certainly an option for them. So it makes you wonder what the market would be like. I have to think that there's lots of teams who would love to have Carey Price, but would have a lot of reservations regarding the health and the rehab and everything with the knee and the fact he hasn't played all year. So only time will tell. But Price's recovery right now appears to have seen a setback, and it's not looking good. It's hard to say exactly when we will see him on the ice. Now, another quick update on the Habs that's not necessarily trade related, but Hughes did address the fact that they're hoping to sign one of their top prospects and defenseman, Jordan Harris. Now, there was a lot of concern, not so much since Hughes has been on board, but prior to that Harris may not sign with Montreal and may stay in college long enough to become a free agent, and they might not be able to get him under contract. But obviously, this is a whole different scenario. Harris plays at Northeastern, where, of course, Hughes' son and Marty St. Louis' son are both on that same roster. So he's made it clear that he's been having conversations regularly with the player and the family recently and keeping in touch. And he seems very confident that they will be able to get him signed as soon as the end of this season, once they're fully done and eligible. So we'll see where that goes, but that's certainly positive and optimistic. But as soon as Hughes came on board, that was one of the first things I said, is that certainly increases the odds drastically to getting him under contract. So that will be a plus and a bonus to know that he's got a bit of an inside scoop there. And it does also look like the Montreal Canadiens are possibly going to be hiring a former New York Ranger executive who was the director of European scouting. So, of course, very familiar with Jeff Gorton, which would be Nick Bobrov. Of course, he's been spotted with Hughes and Gorton recently. There's belief that the Habs are looking to bring him on board. They don't know the exact role, at least that's not really been speculated as of yet, what his job title would be with the Habs, but certainly another addition to their front office in some capacity, which likely I would assume would be involved with European scouting of some sort, or maybe it could be something a little bit different. Time will tell on that front, but certainly it's appear here that the Montreal Canadiens are wide open for business. I think we can fairly say that without any reservations, knowing that they already pulled off the first trade, significant trade, really in some time, heading towards the deadline, trading Tyler Toffoli to Calgary. Montreal is not waiting for other teams to make moves to kind of set the market. You see a lot of posturing around this time of year for teams waiting to do that. They kind of want somebody else to go first, especially the teams that are selling, like the Habs are, because they want to see what the return's going to be. And obviously, it kind of sets the tone for other things. So if you see another player that's comparable to your player being traded and it's the returns more than you thought or more than you were asking for, then suddenly you can ask for more and it's totally justified, right? So a lot of teams are, a little bit gun shy like that because they want to obviously maximize the return, which totally makes sense. But as Ken Hughes said, they want to make trades that they see for the future and really basically step up, give us a call, make a fair offer, and we'll get a deal done. He doesn't seem to be all that interested in kind of waiting it out. And of course, we saw with Ben Chiarot, injuries can happen and can certainly have an impact on the player's value and their availability, and could put your organization at risk to not get anything in return. So what other trades might we see from Gorton and the Hughes? I mean, obviously there's players that are not, just because they would consider moving doesn't mean they're all going to take place. But I think it's fair to say the pending unrestricted free agents like Pitlick, who they just acquired in the Toffoli deal, Cedric Paquette's another one. They're likely not returning. So if they can kind of send them off or mid to late round picks or anything small like that towards the deadline, I would assume that will take place if there's a market for them. I mean, I'm not sure how much of a market there will be, but if there is, it's going to happen. Clearly, Ben Chiarot's going to be traded. Listening to Ken Hughes talk today, it sounds like they would have traded him today. In fact, I think he even said that if they had the fair offer on the table right now, they would take it and trade him. So there's no doubt Ben Chiarot will not be a Montreal Canadian beyond the NHL trade deadline. We've heard numerous reports from a lot of different teams, NHL insiders, that there are lots of teams interested. We know that. We know the Flames are interested, and they did discuss Chiarot and Toffoli as part of a larger deal, but they felt basically the insiders are saying that the Habs can maximize the return by doing things separately here. If you feel that each player on their own can generate a first-round pick or a high-end prospect, then you're certainly going to want to, maybe do them separately, like I said, to get that from different sources to kind of maximize what you're able to get. Now, I've also seen some NHL insiders saying that the Montreal Canadiens are already pretty well stockpiled on draft picks, so they are more interested in prospects in many cases. Now, of course, in some cases, if they can get a higher first-round pick, that's something they're going to be interested in as well. But they already have a couple first-round picks in this 2022 draft. We know it's not the deepest draft we've seen in recent memory. So clearly, if they can get some picks for 2023, that would probably be something they're interested in. But at the same time, like I said, if they can get players that are closer to being NHL ready, because obviously when players are drafted, we're looking at, in a lot of cases at least, except for the odd exception, about 3 years before they can really be a regular. Sometimes it's 4 or 5, and sometimes they don't work out at all. So clearly, the more players they can get that are closer to being NHL ready, the better. So it might not all be picks that they're looking for here, but we know Chiarot 100% between Boston and St. Louis. The Rangers have been connected. We've heard Florida. We've heard Calgary. The teams in California, especially LA, to an extent. So there's certainly lots to be considered there. It's just a matter of which team steps up first with the best offer to get things done. Now, he also addressed Jeff Petry, so I have no doubt they will trade Jeff Petry as well. It's just a matter of finding that right deal. He basically said he would trade Jeff Petry, but of course that it has to be the right deal that works for both sides, and it's just that simple. So at the end of the day, Jeff Petry, I believe, kind of wants a fresh start somewhere else. If the Habs can find that, he will indeed be gone. There has been linkage to the Dallas Stars around John Klingberg. I'm not 100% convinced that that's really all that legit, but I know that there was some references in his comments today to Dallas, so he kind of makes you think that they have been possibly having conversations. But I know right now that the Stars, I think, are under pressure by ownership to try to get into the playoffs. I don't see them selling anytime soon. If we get closer to the deadline and they fall back enough, then maybe it does happen. I think Klingberg wants a trade, and there's possible that it could still happen if they get a good enough replacement. So could he be traded for Petry? Maybe, but I'm not really sure that's the best deal or makes the most sense for the Habs in that regard. But at the end of the day, Petry is certainly available for sure. Now, I've seen Darren Dreger of TSN put out some information today suggesting that the Habs kind of have a would like to trade list and a keep list. So if you will, a couple of players that were on the keep list that he mentioned were Brendan Gallagher and Josh Anderson, citing the fact that you definitely need a few veterans to stick around to be a part of the rebuild and kind of help lead the younger players, and which is important to stay, semi-competitive during the tough transition phase. Both have longer-term contracts, would probably be tougher to move anyway. So it seems, according to him, he feels like those are two guys, at least for the short term, that will likely not be traded and that are likely going to be sticking around to help with things here. Now, from the would like to trade list, but of course doesn't mean they're going to be traded, but players that they would like to move if they can. So the list of players that they would like to move and are looking to find deals for to be able to move on are including Arturi Lehkonen, Mike Hoffman, Christian Dvorak, and Jonathan Drouin. I think we could also likely include some defensemen that are on short-term expiring deals as well, including Brett Kulak and Chris Weidman, who's come back from the KHL this year and had a pretty decent rebound year in the NHL. Now, when it comes to these other players, as we mentioned before, Dvorak is a player that has not worked out for them. They paid a big price to get him. I could see a scenario where maybe they don't move him because they can't get the deal that they want to justify it, considering that how much they paid to bring him in. When it comes to Lehkonen, though, as I mentioned before, a lot of teams see him as being a real solid, third line penalty killing kind of guy, kind of like the kind of player that we've seen, like for example with Tampa when they had their, which was really a solid third line, which was a second line a lot of the time, like Gaudreau and Coleman and those guys, Gunny Gord. Like, he could play a similar type role. So I know that there's been some connections as well between the Rangers and Habs, and I think that if the Habs and Rangers are talking about anybody, to me, it could be Chiarot, but it could be very well be Lehkonen as well. That wouldn't be super shocking. We've heard reports that the Habs are quite high on some Rangers prospects. Of course, I wonder why that is, because Jeff Gorton is very familiar with many of them, considering he was involved in drafting and helping develop a lot of these players. So he'd be very, very familiar on all these different players. I mean, whether it be Kravtsov or Hayek, there's some of them are not going to be moved, of course, but those are two right off that I think they would consider for the right price. But we'll see where that goes, but we could see a connection there between the Habs and Rangers that would not be shocking. And of course, guys like Hoffman and Drouin don't have a lot of term left, but there is some. Both, I think, would benefit from a fresh start somewhere else, especially Drouin, to get away from the Montreal media. Probably would be wise. We know he's had a hard time there, a solid hockey player, but just has had a hard time kind of putting it all together. But that's quite a long list of players that very well could be moved. So we've already seen Toffoli go. We know that Petry's available. We know that Chiarot's available. And when you include Lehkonen, Hoffman, Dvorak, and Drouin, along with guys like Kulak and Weidman, maybe Paquette if there's a market for him, that's quite a substantial portion of this roster that is actively available for trade right now. Like I said, Ken Hughes does not appear to be sitting back and waiting. As soon as he gets the right deal that he likes for the future of the team, he's going to take it. So I think we're going to see a lot of activity. I think it's fair to say as well that we're definitely seeing the beginning here of a full-scale Habs rebuild, which is something that the team hasn't gone through in forever. Obviously, they're historically bad this year, so it needs to be done. And there's likely going to be some short-term pain for some long-term gain. But at this point, we learned a lot today from the Hughes press conference. I think it's fair to say the full rebuild is on, and in the whole list of players that we rattled off here, very well could all be moved if the right deals are found. Some have links to teams, a lot of them don't, but there's still lots of time left for negotiations to take place and deals to be found. So let me know your thoughts on the Habs. Which players do you see going where? Give me some mock trades. We'll discuss further down in the comments. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.